And with no further ado, because as ever, time is always of the essence, I'm going to introduce the first speaker, who is Frances Griffiths, who's a dear friend of mine from England, who I'm sure is known to many of you. She's chair, she was the former chair of the board of the trustees of the Institute of Group Analysis in the UK, and she's also a group analyst. So Frances is going to talk about a subject very close to my heart, and that of Brexit. Frances, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. And just to make sure that you can hear me, Claire, can you?
Absolutely.
Good, fine. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us for this subplenary. I'm going to talk about Get Brexit Done. In 2016, Britain voted to leave the European Union, and as we were promised, to take back control. Now, 3.5 years later, with nothing to show for endless negotiation, and with a re-elected Tory government with a huge majority, we've achieved what the political playwright James Graham wrote, which is the insatiable desire of the British public to be fucked by an old Etonian. Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, and David Cameron before him are old Etonians. Eton is a boys' boarding school and a shorthand for privilege. One could say that a hierarchy of class and wealth are the marks of Britishness. They define us and separate us as the great and not so great. I suggest our identity as great was threatened by membership of the EU, and Brexit offered a solution. When we begin the process of looking at the language of Brexit and Get Brexit Done, what emerges is a picture of a deeply traumatized society, divided by inequalities of class, wealth, health, and opportunity. Our foundation matrix is one where we learn to know our place. And the insidious, creeping, neoliberal language, make Britain great again, has connected us through the social unconscious to this foundation matrix. It's powerful and coercive and sadly successful. The single word Brexit has taken on a symbolism, has become a metaphor for this greatness. And as we now leave the EU on the promise of this greatness, we realize it's a myth based on an ideology of a shared reality. I examine this process of time travel from the present to the past and then to the future using the methodology of group analysis. I begin with the present reality, and this is a most important moment in time. A collision of at least two concurrent traumas, COVID and Black Lives Matter in this moment, has created a tsunami, a huge wave of expressions that exposes the bedrock, the myth of our socio-political culture. It has amplified every health, economic injustice, and inequality we have ever had, and puts the myth of a shared reality to the test. This, I propose, is what the language of Brexit intends to cover up in an ideological swindle that we will now explore. First, I begin by looking at Get Brexit Done as a show of strength. Get Brexit Done is the command or the imperative. The electorate must vote for it because, and I say this tongue in cheek, they know the value of a powerful leader, connecting, I would say, to our colonial past. It confers power on a leader who's promised us a return to a past of empire building and colonialism, but in the future. There is a madness and out of touch reality to this proposition. Clearly, there is more to imperatives than meets the eye. An imperative commands our attention. Not only must something be done, but we expect that someone will do it. As with the slogan "Build the Wall," used by President Trump to secure his election, it creates an aura of authority and suggests a heroic leader will make life better for us all. Except what both slogans, Get Brexit Done and Build the Wall, achieve is a sham and a lie, and as the American historian and writer Timothy Snyder points out, a void. Neither will solve the pain of children going to bed hungry, if of course they have a bed to go to. We were never great. We've only believed we were great as a result of a narrative to tell of our glorious past and presence in the world. This rewriting of our past has been sold to us all with the intention of creating our identity as a heroic and successful nation. It gives us a false sense of our own identity. And at a deep psychological level, it creates a crisis of belonging and uncertainty as to who we are. Our role in the world as the good conquering hero is, of course, counterfactual. In reality, we plundered, violated, and made others afraid. And this has been our work over centuries of empire building and colonization. The national identity that we now crave is revealed in a major speech given by Gavin Williamson as Secretary of State for Defence in February 2019 on his government's long-term strategy, and I quote, "As we leave the EU, it is up to us to seize the opportunities that Brexit brings. The UK is a global power with truly global interests. Brexit has brought us to a moment, a great moment, a moment when we must strengthen our global presence," listen to this very carefully, "and enhance our lethality and increase our mass." This speech has embedded within it triumphalism and smacks of the old colonialism moderates hoped to have left behind. And as Fintan O'Toole, an Irish writer and journalist, adds, with fantasies of reasserted world power. One of the most important questions in the 21st century is what to do after empire. But Brexit is not the answer. For what we're left with as a result of Brexit is the illusion and fantasies of power and greatness, a fantasy future. Get Brexit done as the language of a neoliberal democracy. Brexit uses the language of a neoliberal democracy to achieve a view of the world in which all dissenting voices are drowned out. We need to be worried about this, for in a profoundly sinister way, the intention is, and I quote, not to change the situations people find themselves in, but to change people's feelings about their situations. As Alex Finlayson, Professor of Political and Social Theory, says, the government in a post-democratic world is not unconcerned with what you think or want or need, but it doesn't require your participation. We are the subjects of single data points in a larger firmament. What is meant by this latter point of us as single points, data points in a larger firmament, requires further discussion. It brings to mind Fuchs and his matrix with nodal points. However, while this phrase may have the appearance of inclusion, it is exactly the opposite. A single voice, a single data point needs to be amplified against the backdrop of a group to make it heard. A single voice speaking into a void gets lost. While our being is acknowledged in the larger firmament, not all voices or can or will be heard. Some will be excluded, and this is justified as inevitable. The politics of inevitability are anti-group and anti-democratic. And if it's inevitable that the leader won't and can't hear what you need, for example, a roof over your head and work, perhaps, then you have to pin your hopes on someone else noticing. A nanny, perhaps, because the parent, the leader, is too busy to hear you. This is what is called a nanny state, and it's based on an upper-class notion that looking after one's own children is best left to someone else. Get Brexit Done as classist. The nanny knows best culture is embedded in classism that is a mark of our British identity. The upper classes employ nannies so they don't have to engage in the messy business of bringing up their own children. The nanny state knows best what needs to be done, and they will do us the favour of getting it done without us having to think. This is powerfully conjured up by the imperative to get Brexit done, a messy business that's left best to someone else, ideally a paid hand. Let's not dirty our hands with engagement in this simple matter, but it's not a simple matter at all. Be afraid of people who promise an easy shortcut to simplicity, warns the author Eli Shafak in her recent book, How to Stay Sane in an Age of Division. Psychologically, our socio-political history has prepared us to swallow inevitability politics and to endure and survive the pain of loss, grief, separation, isolation. It has also prepared us for the possible collapse of Great Britain in leaving the EU. Our heroic nature and identity dictates that we need to show the world our greatness. Get Brexit done as an unexpressed desire for something. The financial crisis of 2008 created a strong desire for someone or something to sort out a huge mess. It was traumatic. It seriously divided an already divided country into those that made vast fortunes at the expense of those that lost theirs or never had one to lose. The danger in that moment in 2008 was that it held the potential to collide and resonate with the past trauma of colonization and empire building, which left many poor and miserable at the expense of those who made great fortunes. I believe the financial crisis was of our own making, that is, us in the West, and posed a risk to our identity. The trauma of 2008 was deeply shaming to our sense of self. And this deep sense of shame was projected into the EU to save our face and cover our shame. However, it did paradoxically provide the right wing with the opportunity to revisit the past and breathe life into a narrative of greatness, this time blaming Brussels bureaucrats and immigrants for our financial demise. When the actual threat of increasing national interest was at home and not over there in the EU. It was inequality and the growing divide between extremes of wealth and poverty in Britain that was of concern and had very little or nothing to do with the EU. But Brexit diverted attention from increasing anxiety, not listening to the impact of poverty, class, and race on people's lives, but by resonating with a narrative of sameness. So the narrative went, we're all in this together, and we know this from our shared history. We have a shared memory of how to deal with an external threat, and a threat of this magnitude requires strong action. Adopting the role of the oppressed required action to protect us from an oppressor. Brexit served this purpose. It created the landscape for a deeply embedded culture of masochism to take hold. We can be strong and defiant and inflict pain on others to deflect from our own pain. The pain of poverty and disadvantage becomes the fault of others and not those closest to us. Get Brexit done in our social unconscious. Juan Hubert Ocklander, group therapist, wrote, political cartoons and other popular expressions, when subjected to group analysis, uncover the foundation matrix of a country. uncovering the unspoken communication in the slogan "Get Brexit Done" reveals the depth of unspeakable trauma. The trauma is in an ideology of a shared reality of the past as great. And the author Hannah Arendt warns, and I quote, "When certain things become unspeakable, they become unthinkable. To survive this, we need words to mean things and to stop the degradation of a shared reality. When things cannot be spoken about, the rupture in our identity created by the degradation of a shared reality is profound." So in conclusion, I propose Brexit is like a snake oil salesman, sells us a lie. It, in Brexit, seeks to promise a return to a nation state, a shared reality of our greatness, and the referendum in 2016 provided the map. While others saw EU membership as an existential necessity for their future survival, Britain saw it through the lens of an existential threat of losing its place in the world as great. The myth of greatness, portrayed as a shared reality, was in grave danger. Getting Brexit done could save us. But in the present traumas of COVID and Black Lives Matter, there is no such thing as shared reality. We're never in the same boat, unless, of course, as Earl Hopper says, we associate in a common denial of the present traumatic reality. It's in the process of being unable to deny the present traumas that has put us, in some senses, in the same boat. And as others have said, in a phenomenon of overlapping worlds in which, and I quote, "a rupture, commotion, or catastrophe in the social political context that both analyst and group members or patients share has put us all in touch with our foundation matrix. The past is in the present, but the future might be at risk. Brexit presents an overwhelming risk to our health, as do COVID and Black Lives Matter. And it's our privilege as group analysts that provides the context in which we pay close attention to the language to connect the present with the past in order to keep a future alive. Communication and paying attention to verbal and non-verbal communication is of critical importance in securing a future in which there are multiple identities and realities against the threat of a single narrative. And Fuchs would almost certainly be in agreement with Timothy Snyder, who calls for a politics of responsibility, and Marta Gessen, author of a recent book, Surviving Autocracy, who says, "We need words to mean things." The single word Brexit has taken on a symbolism, has become a metaphor for this greatness, but it's a myth based on an ideology of shared reality. Group analysis counters this ideology. Finally, Dr. Clare Gerada calls for a period of deep reflection, a national large group in the guise of a National Assembly. She says, and I quote, "We must collectively form new attachments with each other, and I would add, with ourselves and our identities." Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Frances. What a powerful speech, and honest and unbelievably painful as someone that is sitting through and living through what you're describing. And I don't think I'll ever hear or think of the word Brexit anymore without associating it with triumphalism, as you've so eloquently described. So thank you so much, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion. Brilliant speech. So next, absolutely wonderful to have Ronnie Levine. And it was her idea to have this workshop, which of course should have been live, but I think it's fabulous that we're having it at all. and to get the three perspectives of Israel, the UK, and the USA. And Ronnie is you all know Ronnie, clinical psychologist. She's an individual and group psychoanalyst, and she's also going to be the discussant at the Fuchs lecture next year. So we're going to have the pleasure, hopefully, fingers crossed and toes crossed, of seeing her live next year in May in London. But Ronnie, over to you to speak about what's going on in that dear country of yours with that wonderful leader who seems to go from one day to the next saying the most awful things. Thank you, Ronnie.
That's a good way of describing it. For the past 4 years, I've been studying heightened states of arousal that have swept my country and how it has impinged on democratic functioning. This is what I've learned. It is my contention that the national leaders' transgressions, specifically the transgressions of President Trump's, are primitive emotional communications that are meant to penetrate the unconscious of his supporters and his critics for the purpose of arousing intense feelings. The arousal for his supporters functions to create an emotional bond with Trump, to have them relinquish their reflective functioning or critical thinking, and have Trump shape their mind and narrate their sense of reality. For the president's critics, transgressions are also meant to create arousal, inciting and exciting reactions, which impinges also on the mind by the continuous too muchness of disruption and chaos, which causes a distress of the mind, a disequilibrium. In all cases, the mind is attacked. Through his transgressions, the president is expressing and exemplifying that affect and not reason is the potent, legitimate tool for maintenance of power and policy. Trump's emotional communications have been creating what relational analyst Ruth Stein referred to as a perverse pact with his supporters, which is the relationship contracted against reality, to uphold each other's superiority, provide intoxicating sense of power, and a relationship in which lies poses as truth and truth looks like lie. This emotional bond, with its attack on thinking, dangerously paves the way for the populace to be available for authoritarian governance. Now, Trump's appeal or sales job was by being the transgressive candidate out of the box guy from the get-go that would save his overlooked, humiliated, largely white followers. Many of his followers come from social identity groups that were traumatized by rapid changes in society, chiefly global economy that had extreme income imbalance, technological advancements, and sweeping liberal, multiracial, multicultural elite as they perceived it. He was great, only he could fix it. His followers needed him to be great, invested in him being great for their own sense of stability and greatness, and so the emotional bond was built. The perverse pact also included more calculating politicians who exploited or was forced to collaborate, some might say Vichy style, with Trump, and enter into the partisan divide for their own economic, social, cultural policy or benefit. But the base bought into the emotional pact. Hopper's massification cult, leaving their mind at the door of reason for a connection to a greatness, to a cult-like father figure. Now, transgressions in itself are not bad. Without transgressions, there would not be protests against repressive societies that need to become more inclusive democracies. What is seen as dangerous social political transgression for one group may be felt as an act of liberation for another. In the US, the loyal supporters of Trump felt oppressed by political correctness stemming from multiculturalism and liberal values that wanted they wanted to be liberated from their stranglehold. They wanted their respect and power, and Trump gave it to them. So how can we understand the unconscious of social transgressions? Transgressions are breaches or violations of laws, rules, or codes of conduct. They are both intrapsychic and social phenomenon. Civilization demands repression of instinctual life and is pitted against natural urges that we want satisfaction, we want release. Freud understood that while sublimation can transform our sexual and destructive instincts so that we can be socially useful, it's not always successful. There's always a struggle between sublimation and desire that is universally built in to the individual psyche and the collective group social unconscious. In fact, social prohibition makes things sexy, desirous. Lacan refers to that as jouissance, as an excessive excitement arising from the forbidden desire. There it goes, there. Trump excites and tempts violation of these prohibitions by highly charged verbal, pre-verbal, pre-symbolic, transgressive communications and actions. These highly charged communications, I seem to have noise outside. Do you hear this? Sorry about that.
I think it's the rubbish collection. That's what it sounds like.
It's very early here in the morning.
Ronnie, carry on. You're fabulous.
These highly charged communications affect the social unconscious of the national population. From a Laplanche perspective, these communications have sexual destructive drive components, intersubjective in nature, and meant to trigger our own repressive urges. Here's how Trump's interactive communication works. While civilized life exacts the price of repression, not everything in the unconscious becomes sublimated. There's always some residue that's left, and it leaves a longing. For Lacan and Laplanche, the pre-verbal child's love object, the lost breast or love object of mother, has been replaced by a fantasy breast that holds the blissful idealized state. It is the mythological state that is longed for, but will never be found. It is felt as a lack and becomes a universal unconscious quest for the missing love object, experienced as a longing. These, I believe, are the unconscious longing that fuels the group mythic quest that Vulcan refers to as chosen glories and chosen traumas that drives unconscious group life, experience, and actions. These mythic quests can fuel democratic liberation movements and can fuel autocracies and atrocities. Trump excites the arousal of the repressed. I just have to say that again. Trump excites the arousal of the repressed. Trump, for his base, activates and exploits these unconscious mythic longings, their chosen glories and chosen traumas with his, very similar to what Francis talked about, Make America Great Again, by inciting and joining, and also joining the white resentment and fear against Black Lives Matter for replacing them. Trump solidifies his emotional bond with his joining of shared unconscious fantasy, the joining of resentment to a foe, and shared loyalty with his base. In addition, he promotes an enjoyment of being at a state of threat, an enjoyment that can never be satiated, but now joined by Trump, now a crusader, which creates a group cohesion. As long as Trump incites longing and promise fulfillment, he can remain a loyal base. Transgressions can do another thing. It creates another kind of longing to surpass limits without consequence, without concern, an omnipotent state. And Trump represents this forbidden pleasure beyond limits as he's been cultivating the mindset with his loyalists that he has to struggle with this out to get you laws that he's repeatedly proven to be beyond consequence. He and his base revel in his omnipotence. Now, up to now, I've been focusing on how Trump's primitive forms of communications penetrate the social unconscious to stimulate primitive mythic fantasies of longing and omnipotence. But the transgressions have another insidious effect on the social unconscious and on the mental status of the nation. The overstimulation, the rapid and repeated daily doses of highly charged, aggressive, sadistic communications, as well as the chaotic disruption of governing, reignites early vulnerabilities of anxieties, and in particular, annihilation anxieties arising from the earliest of traumatic experiences. These experiences recapitulate what Laplanche describes as the fundamental helplessness that we all have experienced in our infancy, in which we were overwhelmed by our caregivers' unconscious and had to succumb for our own survival to both unconscious sexual aggressive and sometimes sadistic messages, he terms it enigmatic, that we could not fully metabolize or sublimate. This remains a source of excess stimulation that could be reawakened by internal or external traumatic experiences. These shocks generate chaos and psychic disorganization, a disequilibrium of the mind. Trump's primitive forms of communications, I maintain, are traumatizing and generate pervasive anxiety in the population, especially from his critics, like me, who are not insulated by a loving bond with him. These are experienced on an individual intrapsychic level and within the group's social unconscious. For Trump's critic group, the existential anxiety is the catastrophic fear that the country is losing its democracy. Trump anxiety, actually is coined Trump traumatic stress disorder, has become a daily occurrence in my New York City practice and is a driving force for the Biden election. So what exactly the kinds of transgressions he's been doing, Trump's doing? Well, there's so many, I'd be taking all of the 20 minutes. So just let me say this. He attacks norms, he attacks dissent, he attacks independent governmental institutions, thereby undermining checks and balances and places them above the law without consequences. He also breaks norms in ways that he communicates to the public. He has recorded over 20,000 lies, and he uses Twitter in the unique way of torpedoing the reflective transitional space of the mind with inflammatory affect bombs. He stokes racial and misogynist hate through innuendos and attacks. He utilizes symbols as signifiers, such as politicizing mass during an epidemic, or calling for a militia, or holding up a Bible to activate loyalty and direct resentment at his opponents. His emotional communication aroused loyalty and entitlement by linking combative power binary relationships, strong versus weak, winner, he even says weak, but a lot of contempt in the second part. Winner versus loser, domination versus submission. So what happens to a nation when a president transgresses? I suggest three very powerful dynamics. It disinhibits social restraint and allows for the normalization of the destructive expression of attacks on others and hate crimes. People are encouraged to identify with the above the law father figure, and he invites an indulgence of omnipotent victory fantasies without consequences. This creates fear and chaos and violence. It further recreates re-traumatization for those who live with an out-of-control parent or social authority figure, such as police brutality. The social and psychic environment is experienced as unsafe. 2, he has a them versus us, a divisiveness. He foments polarization. Operating from a paranoid position, each social group fears extinction from the other. And 3, he attacks thinking. Trump has dangerously attacked thinking first by his transgressive, arousing emotional communication, and 2, by not providing the containing function as a leader would allow a nation and its group to participate in reflective dialogue. Similar to a mother providing the thinking apparatus for the child that Beyond talks about, from the leader's national group relationship emerges, I believe, the thinking apparatus that allows for meaning, coherence, and stability for the states of mind in the nation. Trump has promoted feeling and fantasy over reason and reality, and we've seen this in his attack on science for the pandemic and his inciting paranoia and degradation in my current national election. Beyond also argues in his classic paper on attacks on thinking that there are varieties of stupidity, survival operations that we go to, such as denial and blame and detachment, that keeps us from reality. And so Trump and his social groups are co-creating this distortion in reality. The bombardment of transgressive emotional communications can make the populace psychically dumb, which Robert Lifton had talked about, and stupidity, mindless, giving our minds up, relinquishing our minds to a demagogue. Finally, I too am quoting Hannah Arendt, is a person to turn to when national leadership threatens a society's mind. An expert on totalitarianism, she studied systematic lying by the national leadership. She studies how authoritarian regime attacks truth, facts, by making false equivalencies. And at a certain point, truth doesn't matter. People don't even care about it. The populace wants not truth, but a consistent narrative to ease the anxieties of living with a difficult reality and have their mood be resonated with, their feelings resonated with. The demagogue is skilled at supplying conspiracy and a glorious narrative that resonates to the mood. Further, Arendt warns us that the study of, with her study of Eichmann's Nazi war crime trial, that a lack of reflective thinking, critical thinking, allows social group to lose their capacity for moral choices they do not see in humanity as the group's consciousness is weakened. This paves the way for reluctant collaboration or blind allegiance to an autocracy and violence. Violence of thought leads to violence. In conclusion, presidential transgressions are emotional communications to its nations. They become dangerous when there are traumatizing social crises overwhelming the national population and when affect is split off from reason and reflection. Crises are opportunities by leaders to bind affect or to inflame it. Affect provides essential bonds for connections and aspirations. But when a country's social group live in the paranoid position, national group feelings of unbridled resentment and fear are easily summoned and easily can be exploited by its leaders to maintain power. However, a leader needs to integrate affect with reason to maintain a democracy. President Trump's transgressive communications have flamed arousing affect over reason that has undermined his managing the pandemic crisis. He's inflamed racial discord, and he's currently inflaming the democratic process of an election. But there is a chance for shifting group dynamics. The devastating consequences of Trump's mishandling of the pandemic and the brutal racial murder of George Floyd have tested the limits and have reawakened social consciousness of the harm done by governing by affect and fantasy over reason and reality-based thinking. The election we are currently having in the US is testing whether transgressive, arousing affect and fantasy will overwhelm containment and reason, and whether democracy in America can survive. The nation, to preserve its mind and to not normalize perverse, destructive ways of governing, needs to be socially and politically engaged, just like a malignant matrix in a therapy group. To persevere, we need to contain frustration, anxiety, stay involved, curious, and alert. Thank you.
Oh, Ronnie, that was absolutely superb and so powerful. And I've picked up, affect bombs, politicizing mass, the binary relationship, the Trump post-traumatic stress disorder. I think we've all got that. And also it explains, I think on a personal level, why I feel so anxious every time I hear him being so cruel to journalists and to others. So thank you so much. That was superb. And I know it's early in the morning for you, so absolutely brilliant. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're now going to move from my most favorite city in the world, which is New York, to my second most favorite city in the world, which is Tel Aviv. And I think it's 40 degrees heat there, whereas it's sort of about 9 degrees here. So Uri, I know that you're a clinical psychologist and you're a group analyst, and you're going to talk to us. And again, I suspect will be a spectacular speech about what's going on in Israel at the moment. And over to you. And I know you've got some slides and you're going to share a screen. So Thank you very much. And over to you for the last of the three talks, and then we'll have a discussion.
Thank you very much. Claire, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Great. So thank you for coming. And I was just thinking that if I were to speak only about the current situation in Israel, I could just take, Ronnie, your beautiful lecture and just replace Trump by Netanyahu. And I can, you know, I will have no work. I mean, it's, you know, they can be identical and yeah. But I'm not going to talk only about the current situation in Israel. Therefore, I will just share my screen. And 1 second. Can you see the presentation?
We can, Uri, very well.
Right. So I'm going to speak about the Israeli social unconscious in the service of manipulative leaders, not just today, not just in our times, but also in the past and in the history of Israel. But let's say a few words about the social unconscious. I'm sure that most of you are pretty much familiar with this concept, but maybe for the ones who are not. So the concept of the social unconscious is very elusive and unclear concept because it sounds a bit mystical and almost religious concept. I mean, you have to believe in the social unconscious to work with this concept. Things that connect us together from birth governs us in a way with little or almost no awareness of them. This is what characterizes social unconscious. Now, if we look at the development of the human history, we can say that human beings have suffered four narcissistic decentralization injuries along history. The first one is the Copernican revolution in the 16th centuries, when Copernicus tells human beings that Earth is not the center of the universe. And then 300 years later, Darwin tells human beings that not just that Earth is not the center of the universe, humans are not the lords of creation, that this is another, you know, a kind of narcissistic injury. And then Freud, that was very much influenced by Darwin, 50 years later, in his interpretation of dreams, tells human beings that not just that we are not in the center of the universe and that we are not the lords of creation, we even don't control our minds with his topographical model of the unconscious. So we are not the masters of our own existence. And then, if it's not enough, yes, this is Freud, Fuchs comes 40 years later and say that even our unconscious is not our own unconscious, it is pretty much a social unconscious, which means it belongs not just to us, but to our society or to our culture. So the social unconscious actually is something that decentralizes human beings, but at the same time connect us in very strong bonds. Aaron Hopper, which I'm sure that you are familiar with, defines the social unconscious as a social, cultural, and communicational arrangements of which people are unaware, and they can be unaware of this structure in four ways. This arrangement can be not perceived, which means not known to us, or if perceived, not acknowledged, which means denied, and if acknowledged, not taken as problematic, given, like this is something which is given and there is nothing to do about it, and if taken as problematic, not with the optimal degree of objectivity. Now, I want to in a way, to demonstrate the idea of the social unconscious out of my personal experience, and I will do it really shortly. I participated in 2006 in a conference in Granada, Spain. It was the first time that I attended this conference. I was there I think another 6 or 7 times after, because this is a wonderful conference in the wonderful city of Granada in South Spain. And in this conference, there are small groups and large groups and workshops. And on the first or second day, I participated the large group. This is the place of the conference. It is actually a flamenco school, a very nice place. And we were sitting in this hall, which usually hold flamenco performances, but when in the time of the conference, we were sitting in circles, like in a large group. And the conductor was Elisabeth Rohr from Germany, which is the conductor of our large group now. And I was there sitting in this hall. There were 70 or 80 participants from all over the world, but mostly from Europe. And there were many from Germany and from Spain and other countries. And suddenly, in the middle of one of the sessions, a telephone in the shape pretty much the same as this telephone, a very old telephone, started to ring. And there was, everyone were quiet and looking at each other and at the conductor, not knowing what to do. And after 6 or 7 times that the telephone was ringing, one of the participants stood up and went to the telephone, probably to stop, to answer and stop the ringings. And I found myself unconsciously and not deliberately almost shouting at this participant, "Don't answer the phone." And he turns to me and looked very surprised. And he asked me, "But why?" And I told him, because the Germans will know that we are here. Now, this was not something that came out of, any conscious act. It was completely, automatic in a way. Now, what is interesting for me, after I relaxed a bit from this, is that personally, I don't have any family connection to the Holocaust. I mean, my family arrived in Israel before the Holocaust. I didn't grow on Holocaust stories. Of course, I know many Holocaust survivors, but it's not my personal story. So, just being there at this conference with the German conductor, which is a very good friend of mine. It's nothing to do with her. And I guess that also being in Granada, Spain, which is a place connected pretty much to the Inquisition and the history of Jews and persecutions. So all this was kind of an envelope for my existence in this conference and affected my social unconscious. So this is just a short demonstration of the social unconscious, okay? Now I will move a bit further because just to say something about Vamik Vorkan, and when he speaks about the social unconscious, he also invites us to think in terms of chosen traumas and chosen glories, okay? That in each society, in each nation life, there are chosen traumas and chosen glories that leaders can use in a manipulative way to control public opinion and public feelings. And this is what I'm going to speak in a minute about. Let's say a few words about the Israeli or the Jewish social unconscious. Again, I can talk about it for hours, but I have only 2 or 3 minutes. So what really characterized the Israeli social unconscious are deep anxieties, almost paranoid anxieties about annihilation, expulsion, and persecution. Now, of course, it's not just anxieties, it comes from out of a reality, but again, it's in the social unconscious, it's there, even if it's not in the same way as it was in the past. We have an overreaction to any threat as if it would lead to distraction. So any threat becomes increased and emphasized. We have a need to always be strong and show no weaknesses. We are the chosen people, on the other hand. So this is also something that is characterizing the Israeli social unconscious. We have the myth of the pioneers, the first one who got back to Israel and built the country. We have the myth of the Sabra, the Jew that was born in Israel and corrected, repaired, fixed all the characteristic of the Jew not from Israel. So the Sabra is like a cactus. He's very sweet in the inside, but very stingy on the outside. Of course, the Shoah, the Holocaust, is very important and very strong in this social unconscious. And something else is that Israelis don't like to be suckers. So they are all the time making sure that no one's screw them in any way. And there is an overemphasis of Israel Jews' ownership on the land because this is the promised land. And we can see this. I want to show you a short video that can demonstrate it I think in a very condensed way. There are some words in Hebrew, but you will not have any trouble to understand it. Most of it is in English. Some words are in Hebrew. Okay, 1 second. It doesn't work from here, so I will do it from here. Oops.
Irene, can you help us a bit? Because this worked in the rehearsal.
Can I?
Karine.
I'm sorry, Claire?
We can't see it, Uri.
You can't see it?
No. No, we can't see it. We can just
see it.
No, we cannot see it.
Okay, never mind.
Put it up. I think it worked. Try it again. Put it on full screen and see if we can see it.
Now?
Your PowerPoints, it might. I think if you stop screen sharing and then show the video.
Okay, stop screen sharing. Well, then we can't see it.
Wait a second.
It's somewhere else, I think.
You couldn't see it?
No, Uri.
Okay, so I will skip it and go on with the presentation, okay? 1 second. And we wanted to... That's it. Okay, 1 second. Now, can you see the presentation again?
No, we can't.
It's not on the shared screen yet.
Okay,
share the screen again.
1 second. Sorry for that.
Yeah.
How about now?
Thank you. Yep, we can see it now.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sorry you couldn't see the video, but
that's all right.
It's a very nice one, but next time.
Okay. You've got 5 more minutes just while we're in this interregnum.
Okay. That's fine. So now I want to say a few words about how manipulative leaders along the history of Israel, not just now, have been abusing the history and the history of the Shoah, the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, for their own political purposes. Okay, this is just one example. I could pick any other example. So this is just one example. So in the 40s and the 50s, the 1940s and 1950s in Israel, there was actually a complete denial of the history of the Shoah. People didn't want to hear about it. People didn't want to speak about it because Ben-Gurion, the mythological leader of Israel, he had a strategy of a melting pot, that the new Jew should distance himself from the history and from the European Jew. So for example, the Jews that came from other countries had to give up their family names and their private name and to adapt new names, Israeli names, okay? So there was a real denial and a shame in the history and in the Shoah, in the fact that Jews went like sheep to slaughter, and because it didn't fit the myth of the new Israel. Then in the 50s and 60s there was a change, because the same Ben-Gurion had an agreement with Germany, with the German Chancellor at that time, Adenauer, to get a lot of money from Germany, the reparation agreement between Israel and West Germany. So Israel got a lot of money for Germany for the crimes of the Nazi regime. But there was a huge debate, internal debate in Israel between Ben-Gurion, the prime minister, and the leader of the revisionist movement, the right-wing leader, Menachem Begin. And they had a huge fight, not just Ben-Gurion and Begin, but this fight was a fight between two ideologies, each one taking advantage of the Shoah and of the Jews and Israeli anxieties, manipulating them to their own political needs. Then in the 70s, there was again another shift, because to the other direction. Instead of denying the Holocaust, everyone started using the Holocaust, actually abusing the Holocaust to their needs. We see streets with names associated with the time of the Shoah. Anna Frank Street, Abba Kovner Street. Abba Kovner was the commander of the rebellion in Vilnius ghetto. This is a photo from 1991, the Desert Storm operation, the war in Kuwait, and Israel was attacked then, and people were sitting in the shelter with gas masks because we were afraid that he might bomb us with chemicals. And all the associations went to the times of the Shoah, went to the time that Jews were gassed in the camps. Now, in 2005, there was the disengagement from Gaza. And this is a picture of Jews being evacuated from their house. Now, this is a horrible picture, and those were horrible times in Israel. But if you look at this photo, it's not an innocent photo. It was directed that it would be similar to this photo of Jews in World War II. This is a photo from, I guess, from Warsaw ghetto. So it was directed in a way that it will resonate to the anxieties of the Jews in the Holocaust. Now, our leader today, which I'm afraid I cannot say even one good word about him, he is the master of this manipulation tactics, like Trump and like Johnson. And see what he said about the situation regarding the COVID-19. This is a quote from 2 or 3 months ago. So, unlike Nazi genocide, we spotted corona danger in time. Some see pandemic as humanity's greatest challenge since World War II, but it cannot compare in any way to the systematic diabolic annihilation of 6 million Jews. So you see how, simply he takes the Holocaust and the Shoah, connect it to the situation of the coronavirus, and touches the deep anxieties which are underpinning the existence of Israelis and Jews. But when the IDF Deputy Chief of Staff of Israel, a very, very respected, a very brave man, said something about the situation in Israel today, that Israel today displays similar trends to what happened in Germany in the 1930s, you know, just saying something that we are in a danger, that these processes in Israel today are dangerous processes, he was immediately labeled by Netanyahu and his followers as a coward, as a fifth column. So Netanyahu is allowed to speak about the Shoah and to abuse it in any way he wishes, but not others. So I just want to end by quoting this Yair Golan, saying that it is terrible to me when leadership builds itself not on hopes, not on what's noble, not on the mind, but on the darkest feeling people have. Thank you very much.
That's great.
Fabulous, unbelievably powerful, and an amazing way to end, and brings us right back to the present day and right back to the purpose of this webinar, which is to look at language and the language of metaphors, which in fact not just affect the way how we see things, but also how we act, but also right back to COVID and leadership. Of course, we've got Brexit and the Shoah and the United States election in between, but I'm sure this whole conference has been worth it just to listen to these three speakers and give their perspective of what's going on. So we've now got a debate, and what I suggest is that you unmic yourself when you want to speak, either a comment or a question, and we'll just see if we can get a debate going. If it's too cumbersome to do it that way, then I might just ask you in the chat function to put a hand up and to say you want to speak. But let's just see how we can go with just you unmuting yourself to speak, and then we'll see how things go. So has anybody got any comments, thoughts, questions they want to ask any of the speakers?
First, I want to apologize myself for coming late, because I'm so sorry, Francis, I didn't hear your lecture. I couldn't join earlier. I'm very sorry, because I'm very impressed from Ronnie and your engagement you put in this lecture, and yours, Uri. It was very, for me, it's very impressive. I must think first, but apologize for coming late.
Thank you.
So that's fine. I mean, is there something you wanted to say, Catherine?
Yes, when I hear these three lectures, I'm very near to these themes, because yeah, it's obvious we're all very connected to these themes. I come back to this, what yesterday in the open lecture, in the I don't know the name of this doctor from he told us that with the refugees, that the world has so many borders now, and it's so difficult to move around in world. And it reminds me now to these two lectures I heard from Ronnie and from Uri, that it's so that we all connected, and in our unconscious there are no borders, and we all so connected to this aggressive way of abusing our history, and I'm
Absolutely.
very scared. But
Absolutely.
on the other hand, I have the feeling there are so potent people, like in Israel or like in the US, people who are reflective and who are thinking and who are starting to become more brave to open mind, to open the mouth, and to give us lectures like this.
Thank you, Catherine. And maybe we'll collect some thoughts, and I'll get Francis, Uri and Ronnie to sort of come in a little while. Any more thoughts, comments? Ofra, your mute is on. Unmute yourself. Lovely. Over to you. Yeah, you're still unmuted. You're right, you're fine now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you all for a very moving and giving us a picture, in fact, a frightening picture of the kind of, what kind of leaders this world is in the hands of, which is quite worrying and frightening. Now, somehow I got stuck on this image, Ronnie, that you mentioned, the nanny figure, the need.
That was Francis.
That was Francis.
Francis, nanny, to have a nanny. It reminds me when Bibi in our country started kind of acting out like that. My friend who was a kindergarten teacher, she said, all they need is a nanny or a kindergarten teacher to tell them how to behave themselves, because they behave like children, like infantiles. In a way, I see a lot in common about this kind of behavior that comes up in the pictures, and egoistic and narcissistic moves on the part of the leaders without having any vision. Vision is lacking. Now, talking about Uri, about the Israeli unconscious, well, yes, of course, we've been manipulated, but you know, you have to take things in context of time. But with the later leader that we have, Netanyahu, it's just overwhelming how much he's been using this tool. And also the element of power corrupt. I mean, the man has been too long in power, and therefore he's losing all kind of boundaries, and he gets this omnipotent feeling that he can do it all and nobody can do it better than him. In fact, not even once his wife has expressed such a thought. Nobody can be better than him. You can't have a better leader than him. And we feel, like I can say, I feel, and people I know, imprisoned or helpless. And how do we get rid of it? How come, both in our country and in the United States, that there is still another group of people that think that they are good leaders, that he is a good leader, that Trump is a good leader. I don't know enough about Johnson's opposition or what, but I mean, the rational, normal mind cannot grasp how come people still, I mean, what can be good about people who are just manipulating their nation?
Okay, Ofra, I'm going to thank you very much for that question. I'll leave it out. I'm going to bring Regina in next, but I suspect that Ronnie said something about that when she said the disinhibition, the social restraint is also the desensitization to it. I think we are all being worn down by this, but maybe Ronnie and the others can pick that up. Regina, have you got you're mute. You need to unmute yourself. This is the quintessential of COVID is mute and unmute. Can you? That's what we're going to all take back into our social
completely
unconscious.
right. That's, thanks, Claire, and thank you, Francis and Ronnie and Uri, for these excellent papers. I really want to read them because it's so rich, so much in it. I try to make it short, not to take too much time. Uri, you know yet how much Granada resonated, the example, because I was in the situation and we both were conducting a small group. But I think all these three leaders have something in common. Trump is the most extreme, but this kind of abusing emotions, they really are experts in. They are really great in that, in a certain perverse way. What scares me most is that it works so well. And what gave me a hint in the direction was what Ronnie said about forbidden pleasures. It's not that everybody on all levels, especially on unconscious levels, is only scared. There's also some kind of participation, also with those people who are not violent themselves, too many of that, but it's just to enjoy and to justify all these transgressions. For Lacan has the word jouissance for that, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
I think that's a concept that we really have to explore if we just want to think and to withstand these attacks on thinking. But on the other hand, it's just so scary that so many people, and we all have, I guess, people in our surroundings that are affected on the one or the other level, that they say, oh, it's not so, I don't believe this, I don't believe that, maybe the pandemic is just an invention, I don't know of whom. And then very quickly we are the old anti-Semitic way of thinking. It's not thinking, but these prejudices, as in Soros is mentioned, some conspiracy, not theory, myth are brought up. So I think that's worth exploring. Where are these leaders? What do they represent, and where do they connect?
Thank you, Regine. I'm going to ask for one more comment and then bring the three in to pick up on some of those. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah.
There was somebody else. There was a male voice, maybe two, but I can't see who the male voice was, I'm afraid. Anyway, Chris, do you want to go?
It was Mike.
Thank you very much for the papers. It was an amazing presentation. I'm coming in from Rochester, New York, which unfortunately we've gotten international attention for the latest police violence against a Black man. And for those of you that don't know, he was clearly having a psychotic episode at 3 in the morning and ended up dying at the hands of the police. But the current discussion in the city here is there's a guy who's the president of the Locust Club, which is the representation of the police department. And he is saying that the police followed their training. They did nothing outside of having followed their training. Now they put a bag over his head, what they call a spit bag, and he died of asphyxiation. But what it made me very much, you know, a couple of you mentioned Hannah Arendt, think of her outcome and how she risked losing many friends by indicating that Eichmann, he followed the law, he didn't break the law. But she said his greatest crime was what? The crime of not thinking. And I just love the emphasis on how we are giving up thinking, or how can we, and it makes me wonder if it goes back to the education system in the United States, that children are not helped to actually think. So I'm very, very grateful for this discussion.
Thanks very much. I've got two more voices that want to come in, and then I'm going to ask the three of you just to pick up some of these themes. You don't need to pick them all up, and then we'll go back to the audience. Chantal and Mike, and as I've got the chair, I mean, again, I think Ronnie mentioned it, this fantasy that we're all in. So I think part of it is, my sense is, we are in this fantasy that we're being ruled by law, where in fact the three leaders that you describe are all transgressing the law in a certain way. So Mike first, Mike Tate, I think you had your voice, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's
and then Chantal, just to get you ready. I can't see you.
I'm sitting in my hallway in Dover because this is the one day of the year that the right wing of Britain descend on Dover and protest against refugees. And 2 years ago, all the windows got smashed in Market Square, and I'm in Market Square above it all. So I've sort of shut all my doors and I'm sitting in the hallway, so it feels very strange. Also, the Anti-Nazi League is out there and we're making some speeches, and the police are there on horses. So I kind of feel like I'm in the middle of something. So it's so we'll see where it goes this year. But I suppose the thing that I was kind of thinking about was this. It's, you know, the way in which we place those leaders outside ourselves. And I was thinking that in a way, even though Tony Blair or whatever it was did some good things, there was something about the move towards spin and the move away from truth, which we've been part of. And if we look at our organizations and try to sell ourselves, we automatically move away from truth. I think it's very hard to sell and to remain thoughtful. And my sense is that we, you know, I don't think that we're that divorced from the world that those three leaders represent.
Thank you, Mike. A terrifying thought, and I wish you luck in Dover. I hope your windows aren't smashed. That really is terrifying when you think about what we're talking about. Chantal, and then I'm going to really come back to the three speakers in reverse order, just for one or two of your thoughts, and then hopefully we'll have time to go on. Chantal, you're next.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I just want to really thank the three of you for thinking through something while thinking is under attack, as that was so clearly put. And I guess my comment, well, I had an association to the nanny comment, and I thought maybe that's my job, the psychotherapist as the nanny. I feel like that sometimes, and that gave me some hope. And the other comment that I just felt resonated so deeply with me was, Ronnie, you're talking about in early childhood, being overwhelmed by the caregiver's unconscious, because I feel so paralyzed. I'm actually joining this symposium because I'm going to immigrate to Europe because I feel so paralyzed living in the US. So thank you for that, for putting that into words and helping me think about something that's just so paralyzing.
Thank you, Chantal. So shall we go in reverse order? Uri, do you want to pick up some of those themes? And the three of you, and then hopefully we'll have a bit of time left at the end for a couple more thoughts.
I don't want to take too much time because I think that the comments are wonderful. Just to say that I completely agree with the idea that the conflict is between to think or not to think. And charismatic leaders like Netanyahu and Trump and others, their purpose is really to help people not to think. They don't demand from people to think, and they are frightened from thinking people. And there is a different kind of leadership, which is very difficult to find, but there is a different kind of leadership. Usually it's women that hold this kind of leadership, who invites the people to grow up and to think and to be more responsible. And this is really a conflict between two kinds of leadership.
And that's very interesting when you think of the situation in COVID. I know it's a simplistic generalization, but the women tend to have done better. It may, of course, be that women leaders are elected by a more enlightened population, but a very important point. Ronnie, any first thoughts of these discussions that have been going on?
Sure. I just wanted to make two comments. One, Ofra was saying, well, how to support us. That's kind of what I'm talking about, how he gets into the unconscious and arouses feelings so that they create loyalty bonds, and gets into the conscious to arouse and indulge fantasies. That's really what I'm talking about. The other is that for democracy to work, affect and thinking have to be integrated and not split off. To not respond to the feeling of a country or social groups imperils a country as much as not having a thought. And what democracy requires is an integration. A good leader binds affect and thought and not inflame it. What we have here are people that are, as Uri says, manipulates, inflames, or Francis talks about getting into the fundamental matrix, utilizes primitive experiences to bond with people, arouse for their own exploitation. In democracy, which is being jeopardized all over the world, which is why this is the second time I've had this panel, because I feel so passionate about it, how democracy is at siege around the world, is when a leader does arouse feeling and not integrate feeling and thought. They must be integrated, not split off.
Thank you, which of course your leader does with perfection. Francis.
Well, thank you all for your comments and thoughts. It's been very, very helpful and aroused a lot of interest, for me to follow up, and so many things. So what will I say very quickly? First of all, not only have we lost the capacity to think, but I think we've completely lost something about our moral compass. Morality seems to be so far from where we are right now. And it might seem that Netanyahu and Trump are in the heady position of winning this race to be the worst leaders. But I can assure you that Johnson is very, very close behind and learning a lot from both of them. I'm interested in what Chris and others have said about the nanny state, because I really believe that the nanny state is a really really implicit in the nanny state is keeping us all as children. It's keeping us needing a nanny to take away the opportunity for us to think for ourselves. And I think this is really dangerous. And when Timothy Snyder talks about the politics of taking our role responsibly, I think we have to step up and start to speak out in the way that Michelle Obama did in the States very recently. I was so impressed with the way she spoke from the heart, a bit like Hannah Arendt, and risked what people might think. It was stupendous, and I wish we had somebody here to do the same. Maybe that's you, Claire.
So you're calling for a call to action, which is of course bringing Michelle Obama's, where her husband came in 2008 with a call for action. So maybe group analysts have a role in changing the dialogue. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Ofra who painted slightly a nihilistic view that it's the other that has to sort us out. But I think what you're saying, Francis, is we have to sort ourselves out. We've got a few more minutes. We've got about 5 more minutes. Any other thoughts?
Can I?
Catherine.
Yes, because I just realized how it takes time to come into thinking. And I came late because I was just shopping, and there was a grandmother with her child, with her grandchild also shopping. And I came out of the shop, they are neighbors from myself, and suddenly the grandmother said, "Where is the child? Did you see the child?" I said, "No, you have been just before me, I don't see." And she was really full of fear suddenly. And and she asked, "Oh, I have to call the police." She was with her little bike, a really 5-year-old child. I said, no, I just take my bike and I go to your house. Perhaps she is there. So I did it, and we found her, and she was so happy and relaxed and coming home, and she found the child at her house at home. But I'm just telling you this because I think for thinking, it needs also a person who is thinking with you, who is open a room to contain this stress and to start thinking with you. And I liked very much your ideas, Ronnie, from this transgression, because these leaders, they create this aggression, and stress is like distracting whole thinking. And if there is not a nanny like Michelle Obama or other good nannies, then there is no room to come into thinking.
Right.
And I try to do this in the groups with the young people. These are youngsters between 14 and 20. And it's always this big aim that they give themselves to think, to allow themselves to think and to get distance to the stress and not reacting immediately.
Absolutely, spot on. Any other comments or thoughts? Just unmute yourself, take the mic.
Yes, my name's Frank. I'm from the state of New York, and I just want to thank all 3 speakers and the moderator for providing this opportunity to be together with people from all over the world. I don't have a question or a comment other than to say that this has been so useful for me to know that I'm not crazy, and to hear other people respond to the situation we find ourselves. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Frank. I mean, I must say I was moved to almost tears listening to the 3 speakers, and I've heard them talk about this in the preparation, but it feels slightly hopeless, but I hope we have got hope. Anybody want to say anything else? So we've got about 3 minutes left.
I want just to say,
Smarter.
Madame, first of all, I want to thank you, all the 3 of you. It's helped to think about what's going on, but I'm very pessimistic, and I really, really feel that we're in a very, very bad situation, especially in Israel. And it's like it's like I feel, and I say it all the time, we are a minority. We are the thinking people, are a minority. And that I can say about what you said, Regine. And it's like how can we make other people think also? That's the main question.
Thank you. Thanks. I think there's another Frank that wants to talk, and I think that will be the last, and then I'll have the three of you. Frank, there's another Frank somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you, Frank.
The other Frank. Or Frank. I'm living in the United States, but I'm originally from Germany. And I want to just add one little observation, and I'm not sure what to make out of it. If I watch Donald Trump, he reminds me of a teenager. He has these really good antennas to find where he has to go, and then he provokes. Just like, I mean, I have two teenager daughters, and I was a teenager at one time, and it reminds me very much, I mean, he has a skill set of a very destructive teenager. And I just want to add that to the observation.
Thank you, Frank.
So
right, I'm going to bring the three, and this will close us down instantly at 1 o'clock. So if I haven't said it before and it was shut down, I'd like to thank you all for coming, but especially the three fabulous speakers. The overriding image I've got, and I'm blaming Ronnie for this, is every time now I think of Trump, I think of his breasts. So you've done this to me, and it's a horrible thought. But let's go in the order that you spoke, and then apologies if it cuts off mid-speech, but it'll be out of my control. So Francis, passing comments, we've got 2 minutes to go.
Just thank you for holding us, Claire, preparation that you helped us put in. So thank you for that. Also, thank you to all the people who participated. And I think education is most important. I was a teacher, close to my heart. We have to start thinking to help people think.
Thank you. Ronnie.
I also want to thank everyone. Claire, you did a great job. I think we need to stay alert. Stay alert and not be lulled.
Yes, well, that's very true. And Uri.
Just to say that it's not just women that carry the duty of this other kind of leadership. I agree with Claire that we as group analysts are doing the same, or at least striving to do the same in our groups and in our societies and in our communities. And this is very important that we are doing this, because this is really acknowledging, like Mike said, that it's not out there, it's in there. I mean, all of us are in the threaten to be this Trump or this Netanyahu. It's not just them, it's everywhere. The difference is that we acknowledge this, and we are trying to do something to work with it and to help people to work with it. And this is, for me, the essence of group analysis.
Thank you, and hopefully we can pick up some of these themes in the large group. I'd just like to add, I'm hoping that we'll be able to access your essays and your slides. I presume the conference organisers will make them accessible, but if not, I know this is being recorded, and I suspect we'll all have that recording. So without further ado, we'll see you all in the large group. This will automatically shut down, and you have to then, well, we three will have to rejoin the main system. But thank you very much, everybody, and clap to all the, unmute yourself, and let's clap them. Thanks a lot. Take care.